Yeah.
Hey, folks, you joined me in mid-rant with Anat Shenker-Osario. She is the principal, the head of ASO Communications. In addition to that, she has a fantastic podcast, and the name of her Substack, Words to Win By. And what Anat does is she actually uses data and she does, like, research, and she actually sees where people are, and she goes, Democrats and progressives, maybe you should message, and maybe you should have a winning messaging strategy, instead of, oh, I don't know, just repeating what the third way and the abundance movement and overpaid consultants tell you, which is why you now have the lowest favorability rating since 1994. And so, Anat, I gave a kind of juicy title to this to get you in as much trouble as I'm in, which is the failure of white moderates and the failure of the white data dude complex. Those were your words, the white data dude complex. And what we're going to talk about, and I love you, Grantifa, friends. If Grantifa, we love you here. What we're going to talk about is the following: not just the ethical and moral failure of this type of messaging, why they created these messages, but also why it's a political failure, why Democratic leadership now is stuck in between where their base is and where the money is, and a way forward. And as we just caught us in mid conversation as we started, Anat and I were talking about, there are wins. There are literally avenues, wide open lanes for Democrats to take, to galvanize the public, which is pissed off against Trump's overreach, the failure of the economy, the Epstein files. He's underwater. The question is, do they have the willingness to take it? And so Anat wrote a really big, juicy piece breaking this all down. And she said, "Will your audience be down with me nerdifying?" And I'm like, be down with it. We will embrace the nerdifying. Nerdify away, fellow nerd. Not wherever you want to begin. I give the ball to you, and we'll go back and forth.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate everything you do. So I wrote a piece called Bringing a Survey to a Gunfight in order to really give a backstage look as someone who has been a pollster. It's funny that some people's sort of cursory read of what I'm saying is that I'm anti-research and anti-data. I don't even know what to say about that when literally I co-founded an organization called the Research Collaborative, and I'm in focus groups every single week. We're surveying every week. I definitely do not eschew the importance of listening to people. It's just that I don't think you should wield a thermometer in order to change a tire. So what the piece is really about, it's about my explanation for what I call pollingism. That's not the way that it's known out in the world. The way that it's known out in the world is that the way that you should conduct a campaign, this is the idea, is that you should ask people what matters most to them and then repeat that back to them. And as soon as I say that, you're like, well, that sounds logical or not. Like, that's logical. And there is absolutely a sort of so simple a child would get it logic behind it. But here's the issue with that thinking. The issue with that thinking is that if you are constantly chasing, quote unquote, where public opinion is, then what you are doing is you are not agenda setting. You are not making the conversation be what you need it to be. And the number one strategic imperative of any campaign should be, how do I make the topic, the idea, the concepts that I most need salient rise to the fore? If you are ever and always just being in response to what supposedly the public cares the most about, then you are on the back foot before you even started. And so, what pollingism has done, what it's constrained too many, not all Democrats, but too many Democrats, is into this constant, we just say back to people whatever it is they already believe, or what the poll says that we already believe. Now, there are so many issues with that, it's hard to even get started. And it's why the piece is admittedly quite long. But when you think about something like, let's just take a particular, for instance, Wash, I think you live in Virginia, don't you? Did I make that up? Okay. So,
Right.
Virginia governor's race, who would have thought that people's top issue in the 2021 Virginia governor's race, that if you ask them, what issue do you care the most about? They would have said critical race theory. Nobody. right? Nobody was saying critical race theory is my top issue, because any and every time you ask people that question, the answer is something about money. It's cost of living, it's economy, it's jobs, it's whatever way that is phrased in a survey. And so Republicans look at that and they don't say, oh, people don't give a shit about critical race theory. They don't even know what it is. They say, oh my goodness, an empty vessel, we will populate it with meaning. And here's the key. They don't just issue talking points. They do a 360-degree surround sound strategy where they create an AstroTurf group, aka Moms for Liberty, and they send those nice suburban white ladies, nice in air quotes, to school board meetings in order to create a media worthy spectacle to make critical race theory a topic. Fast forward to last year. How do they bring DEI to the fore? They don't do it by, doing a social media post. They don't do it just by a Truth Social. They do it by sending troops. The reason to send troops to Chicago and to Portland and previously to DC and LA is to prove to their base that those cities need troops.
Mm.
So live their narrative. Back to the DEI example, I realize I'm going all over the place.
No, no, it's there.
They haul university presidents into Congress and they humiliate them in order to prove, and I hope you hear me, I don't think it proves, that DEI is this horrific, terrible thing. So basically, what they're doing is they're constantly setting the conversational terms and leaving Democrats to respond to whatever conversation they make salient. They know that they desperately need 2026 to be a referendum on crime because they know that if it is about anything else, if it is about freedom, if it's about your pocketbook, if it's about morality, Epstein, you know, abductions, concentration camps, all of the harms and horrors, then they have no prayer. So they're hoping to try to make it a referendum on crime, which is why they bring crime to the fore by invading our cities, doing this 360 surround sound. Meanwhile, most Democrats respond by saying, let's do a survey and let's figure out what people's top issue is. Spoiler alert, it's the economy. You can save yourself money. That's always going to be the answer. You don't need to keep asking. And so we will say to people, money, 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 money. Yes, people's top issue is the economy. I'm not lying. I'm not going to say that's not true. Of course it's true. But that doesn't mean that bringing that topic to the fore is actually what's going to cause the behavioral change that you require. And so again, the operative question is, what do I wish people believed? And upon believing that, what do I need them to do? Not what is it that they already are believing and how do I repeat that back to them?
Yeah, and the DI example, the CRT example is very important. I was just bashing my head against the wall. I wrote a piece, I think four years ago in the Daily Beast, breaking down how Republicans manufactured a boogeyman and a crisis with the anti-Sharia bill ahead of the 2010 midterm elections, and they saw that that issue was a non-issue, became a local issue, became a national issue, became an international issue, and then also Republican presidential candidates ran on that in 2012. People got elected off that literal boogeyman. It was a solution in search of a problem. And they did an almost tit for tat reboot with CRT and DNI right here in Virginia. I saw it happening in our local communities. Loudoun County, that school was the testing ground, the laboratory. Loudoun County is also one of the last counties in America to desegregate. Huh. Also a very wealthy county. And so they started going DEI, CRT, and Toni Morrison. This was right before Glenn Youngkin, right, was running with Terry McAuliffe. And I told Democrats, because I was watching the campaign here, I'm like, y'all aren't taking this seriously. Terry McAuliffe just effed up the answer, thought he could just walk in. And I'm like, folks, I've been living here now, not 13 years, but that was what, 9 years? I'm like, y'all, I sense it. Y'all aren't paying attention. They're scaring suburban voters. And they went with Toni Morrison and CRT and DEI. And that wasn't working. But what they hit on is transgender. The transgender. They're making your kids gay. They're making your kids transgender. And then they manufactured this crisis. They used it as a laboratory in Virginia. Then they said, okay, let's go for the gubernatorial race. Oh, it worked. And then Republicans spent more than $200 million on anti-transgender ads in 2024. And it worked, folks. It shifted a lot of people to vote for Republican. Harris only lost by 1.4 points. And instead of the Democrats, being on offense, being proactive, even now you're seeing what they're doing is, let's throw the transgender on the bus. Let's throw woke under the bus. Speaking about crime, immigration, immigration, immigration. What do the Democrats do? Let's be Republican-lite. Let's vote for the Lake and Riley Act. Let's go against Mahmoud Khalil and Rameza Ostrich and these pro-Palestinian activists. And then when you saw a moral, ethical stance, a reframing of the narrative. You saw Chris Van Hollen of Maryland go to CCOT, the friggin' foreign prison, by himself, folks. I always want to bring the receipts. He was by himself. He went. Democrats didn't support him. And he said, I want proof of life of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. It was in the news. Anat, if you remember, for like 2 weeks, he forced it to be in the news. And then within 2 weeks, Donald Trump, on this issue of crime and immigration, he was negative 19 points on Kilmar Abrego Garcia. And then after that, elected officials went to Louisiana to meet Mahmoud Khalil, who was detained without any crime, pro-Palestinian activist. That was in the news. He went underwater. And so what I've been saying, Anat, is on these issues of immigration, crime, ICE, transgender kids, woke. Don't throw all these communities under the bus that vote for you. Why don't you pivot and be on the offense and stand for something? But instead, Anat, you gave me the term white data dude complex, and I added the white moderates. They went for the past 8 9 months with the white data dude complex, the white moderates, and cowardice instead. You have the data. How has that worked out?
Yeah, I mean, everyone on this everyone on this Substack knows how it has worked out. Obviously, the approval rating is in the toilet and all the rest of it, which is, ironic because they keep taking the temperature. They keep taking the temperature while Republicans are out brandishing flamethrowers in order to change the temperature, which is actually the job of a political campaign. And they keep coming back to this concept, and you said that the audience was into wonk. So ready, deep wonk, deep wonk. So there's a reliance upon this concept that is known as WAR, which stands for wins above replacement. What wins above replacement means is that there's a belief that there's an inherent partisanship to each community. So when you hear a district referred to as a +9 D district or a +13 R district, that means that there's an idea that all things being equal, there's kind of an expectation of how the vote will go in, let's say, Loudoun County, or let's say in Alameda County, where I live. Now, what a wins above replacement model does is it posits that each down ballot election, each House race, is an island. And we're going to, say this over here in Abigail Spanberger's district, but we're going to say this over here in AOC's district, but we're going to say this over here in,
Andy
Kentucky.
Bashir, Mamdani.
Yeah, exactly. And the idea is that somehow, I mean, this is what the entire fiction is made out of. That, first of all, what people believe about Democrats is made out of what Democrats say, which
Mhm.
is hilarious because, of course, for the most part in the United States, voters are extraordinarily low information. And that is something that everybody agrees on. Everybody knows, it's widely sort of accepted that most voters are extraordinarily low information. And so how could you possibly base a strategy on the idea that people are going to be rational individuals and make an electoral choice on the basis of this sort of like deeply detailed factual understanding of what this one house race person, that, by the way, most voters have never even heard of, believes? But also at the same time, you think that voters are going to be swayed by the too left discourse of the like woke people in the two blue districts, that's going to kind of throw them off. But the people in those districts will not be thrown off by the let's just Republican-lite. I mean, the entire thing just kind of rests upon a fiction. What the right understands is that you have to have an overarching story. You have to have a repeated refrain that people can recognize because most voters, they don't know things. They vote on brand. And so now this idea that Democrats that win are heterodox, the ones that do well in wins above replacement, meaning they outperform their district. They live in a plus 10 R district, but they manage to somehow, only be -5 or maybe even be +1, right? Basically, if you look at each race as an individual thing, then you have no overarching story of who are the good people, who are the bad people, what are the origins of your pain, which is what Republicans do all the time. And granted, they're peddling lies. I'm not crediting them for that. I'm just talking about narrative. And so the whole thing just sort of collapses in on itself. The way of campaigning that actually does work, and Mamdani's a perfect example of it, but so is Bashir, as you raised, so is Tim Walz, so are lots of people who aren't just running in New York City. It is to understand that if you want people to come to your cause, you have to be attractive, meaning to first of all have a cause. You have to understand that the purpose of politics is not being elected for its own sake, but rather being elected in order to enact an agenda. You actually have to want to get something done, as opposed to just want to be in office to have the placard with your little name on it. And then you have to understand that it is your job, again, as we said, to make the conversation what you need it to be, rather than reacting to the conversation that Republicans set. And to the point that you were making, the challenge that many, not all, Democrats have had for a very long time is that they have operated under the fiction that we can just do the we won't talk about Bruno strategy.
Yeah. We don't talk about ICE, transgender people, woke, Muslims.
As if the only discourse voters hear is from Democrats, as if they don't hear the unrelenting and unchallenged hate baiting, race baiting, division, xenophobia, anti trans rhetoric. And so that just simply doesn't work because we don't get to choose, right? Politics is a shouting match, not a soliloquy. And so basically, the strategy requires that, first of all, you have a cause that you stand for, that you actually attract people toward it. And yes, that means talking about financial matters, but it also means standing up to these unrelenting invectives from the other side. Let me give you an example that perhaps folks don't know about. Zach Polanski, right now, across the pond, as they would say, he won the leadership position with extraordinary margins for the Green Party in the UK. And, I'm biased here, did a project years ago in the UK experimenting with a thing we call the race class narrative, now the race class gender narrative, which is basically what all of this is. And what Polanski is doing, you can look him up if you want to, make sure I'm not lying to you. He is actually stealing away Nigel Farage voters. Nigel Farage is far right. We are talking like white nationalist voters and bringing them to the Green Party while Keir
Wow.
Labor flaps and flails and does what you talked about before, which is basically right-wing light. And so what is Polanski saying? What are successful people saying? They are saying, in essence, yeah, it's true. Someone did take your job. And someone did fuck up your NHS, or in our case, take your health care. And someone is stealing from your pension. And someone is making it so that you have more month in check. If you'd like to know who took your money, it's the people with all the money. That's how you can tell. And if they get you to blame immigrants, or in the UK case, be obsessed with the boats, the boats, the boats, which is the right wing discourse there, then you will not join together with other working people across races, places, and genders to demand that we rewrite the rules so that these billionaires actually pay up. And if we do not make that connection between race and class and gender, then the right, the authoritarians are going to continue to be able to get away with the oldest trick in the book, which is divide in order to conquer. And that is actually the narrative strategy that works, and it has worked in many places.
May I respond to that? Because this is the world's worst I told you so tour of the past 2 weeks that Danielle, my co host, and I are on, where we get no joy and we wish we were wrong. And you're the smart person from my hometown of the Bay Area. You do the numbers, but I'm just an observer. I'm a simple, unfrozen caveman lawyer and English major. But just, for layman's terms, let me cliff notes it for the rest of us and tell me if I'm off here on that. Anat, you said race class narrative, which it was a winning narrative that Obama used. I have said on this show many times the two enduring sins of America are white supremacy and unfettered capitalism, simply racism and greed. You have to tackle both. What we have seen is the establishment class, the political class, the white moderates, the centrists, they hate talking about race. Maybe they'll talk about class once in a while, but they want to just punt race, punt race, punt race, or not talk about it too much, right? And the norm, the means they believe is not Zoran Mamdani, which they say is an outlier, or AOC, who they say is an outlier. They believe Alyssa Slotkin is the means. That's the norm. And Democrats so desperately want to go after Chet. Chet is that white voter, unicorn voter who drinks real coffee in a real cafe in a real state, in a real city. And if they could just get Chet, they'll drop kick Letitia to get to Chet, even though Letitia's been the one bringing her family to vote nonstop, right? The problem here then is you see this strategy in place. Let me bring some receipts. Donald Trump was elected. He did his first State of the Bullshit Union, whatever that was. And the Democrats then decided, who should we bring as a rejoinder? Who should we put in front of the world to show as our message? They brought Alyssa Slotkin. Alyssa Slotkin is from Michigan. She's the moderate. She's the CIA agent, very well educated from New York, who now like apparently forgets that she's very well educated and from New York. And the only thing I remember, not from her, whatever that was, rejoinder, was that she praised Reagan. And the other thing that I remember from Alyssa Slotkin is that she says we need to stop being weak and woke. We need to have the goddamn alpha energy of Lions coach Dan Campbell. That's an exact quote. Now, as that's happening, uh, there was a Zoran Mamdani, and a Zoran Mamdani is running in New York, and I interviewed him when he was a distant second place. And what Zoran did, he goes, "This is what I stand for, win or lose. This is what I stand for. This is my message. I'm not going to waver. Win or lose, this is what I'm about. I'm going to knock on doors. I'm going to sell this message. I'm going to connect with people. I'm going to be joyful warrior. I'm not going to pledge allegiance to AIPAC or Netanyahu. I'm against this war. I am against the abduction of just immigrants. I am going to stand up for the workers. And you know what? Let me throw this out there. Free buses. Why not? I'm going to make New York affordable. The overarching story was I have to make New York affordable. I don't believe in billionaires, but I'll work with billionaires if they exist. And guess what happened? Folks, if you don't know, Zoran Mamdani might become the next New York. He's probably going to become the next mayor of New York City. His narrative of making America affordable, go against the oligarchy. Guess what? People who voted for Trump are now supporting Zoran Mamdani. When it comes to fighting the oligarchy, Alyssa Slotkin said, Americans, Chet doesn't understand this word. Bernie Sanders and AOC then toured to all these real places with real Americans who drink real coffee, translation, white Americans. And they're like, yeah, the rich are screwing us over. The 1% are screwing us over. That's right, damn it. And you see a lot of people who voted for Donald Trump in 2024 vote for AOC. A lot of people who voted for Donald Trump voted for Mamdani. And you're seeing Donald Trump lose the Latino support because they don't give a shit about Democrat or Republican or Democratic Socialist. They're like, they went for Bernie or Trump, anti-establishment in 2016, folks. Latino voters who voted for Trump in 2024 have jumped off and gone back to 2016 numbers. Young voters who just wanted a change, you've seen the polls, they've jumped off of Trump. Now all these bros, these manosphere bros like Aiden Ross and the Nelk boys and Theo Vaughn, have you noticed? They're distancing themselves for Trump. So what it seems to me, Anat, just looking at the tea leaves and you got all the data, people want authentic messengers who are willing to fight for something. They stand for something. And the overarching message that seems to connect independents, people who are disaffected, people who voted for Trump, are people who are promising to take on the 1%, the elite, the oligarchy, to make their lives better without sacrificing Black people, brown people, women, and LGBTQ folks. What am I missing?
Yeah, I mean, that's it in a nutshell. I don't think it's missing. I think what I would put a fine point on is a few things. So this is me sort of extending and just
You got the numbers. You're the brains. You tell me.
um so the first thing to state what ought to be the most obvious thing in the entirety of the world but seems impenetrable to people is that if nobody hears what you're saying, it doesn't matter what you're saying. That should be the least controversial thing that I ever say. And here we are, understandably, lamenting how the right wing has an echo chamber, true, and how, they've basically manufactured propaganda and they have people kind of living in this disinformation bubble. True, 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 true. And instead of understanding that what that means is that rule number one of messaging is let's give them something to talk about.
Hmm.
Democrats will sometimes say, as you quoted Slotkin, like, we need to be strong and we need to be like whatever and we need to be like muy, muy, muy macho, right? Which apparently involves making a very big tent, but not one that includes immigrants or the people who love them, a very big tent, but not one that includes queer people or the people who care about them, a very big tent, but not one that includes women who have the audacity to want some autonomy over their body, a very big tent. Well, what I would say to that is that if you would like a very big tent, you do need, in order to fight authoritarian, as you were saying, right? You have to find a thing that connects people. And that thing is that everyone would like to be able to have a somewhat decent life. In order to have a big tent that actually stands, it needs to have a pole.
Hmm.
Up is simply a tarp that will smother you. And so going back to if you want people to hear you, you have to actually say something that they would notice. When Chris Van Hollen went, as you noted, to CCOT, that gets attention. When in Portland, and I'm biased, I'm a former Portlander, and among the many groups I'm helping are the folks in Portland, they're given people something to talk about, right? The naked bike ride, the inflatable frog. Now we have
Awesome.
inflatable friends. As you've heard me say many times, what you have to do is be too fabulous for fascism. And instead of apologizing for Keep Portland Weird, which is its motto, actually lean into that and say, in essence, we're too fabulous for fascism. Like, this is how we live. This is what we want. This is what we believe. This is the world that we want to create. And rather than living inside of the opposition's frame, which would be crime is down, we are fighting crime, we're tackling crime, actually, we're handling crime, which tacitly is saying Trump and MAGA have a point. It would be valid to come and send the military to invade our cities as long as the crime rate is, whatever X percent. And now we can argue about what that percentage would be. And instead, to exit that frame altogether and critically to show, not tell. It is not enough to be like, but we put out a talking point, but we put out a text. You actually have to perform a different narrative.
Yeah.
In the that odiously, Republicans perform the narrative of saying crime is a really big deal by sending troops, in the way they perform the DEI as a really big deal by, dragging university presidents. They make what they are saying into surround sound so that you cannot avoid it. Meanwhile, many Democrats, not all Democrats, are so wedded to these poll tested talking points that is telling them to say this kind of perfectly calibrated 100-word thing that when I advise them, and I'm giving you a real world example, this is not make believe. When we had the first round fight around the continuing resolution in March, I said very loudly, you need to call this a MAGA murder budget, which I then amended to MAGA murder bill because it's more than a budget. Call this the MAGA murder bill. Why? Because what we would see in focus groups is that when we would say that to swing voters and to disaffected voters, it's not that they would say, yes, that's instantly right. I agree with that. It's that they would go like this. Wait, what? A murder bill? I mean, are people going to die? Which people are going to die? Does murder feel fair? Isn't it really more like manslaughter? Is it intentional, unintentional? In other words, it would catalyze the conversation we require, bringing to the fore life or death. They then did research. They did randomized controlled trials using as their dependent variable Trump disapproval. Why is that what you're measuring when the order of business is to get people to disapprove of the bill and, more importantly, to want to take action against it? That's what we need to be measuring. A lot of the trouble is that people are measuring for the wrong thing. My colleague calls it Susan Collins questions. People are constantly measuring for, does this concern you? Does this concern you? Does this concern you? People being concerned about a thing, but not marching, not protesting, not even talking about it, not sharing it, gets you absolutely nothing. So you're asking the wrong questions. It's not that there is no utility to public opinion. It's really important, but you have to be asking the right questions. I'm sorry, I'm saying a lot at once. Going back to finish the thread, if folks are still with me. So when I said, let's call this the MAGA murder bill, it's not, again, because upon first hearing, people were like, yes, in the same way that they weren't like, yes, upon first hearing of CRT. It's that you have to make the conversation be what you require. And if you want people to hear you, if you want to touch a nerve, you're going to have to touch a nerve. Why, when Republican senators wouldn't release the Epstein files, why were there not groups out calling them Senator pedophile?
That's
Why
right.
the shutdown fight, part two, were we refusing the framing of shutdown and instead saying, look, I can't in good conscience fund this war against Americans. I will not be complicit in giving money to fund a war against Americans, to steal the life and death care that they need, to abduct our neighbors, to send the military to terrorize our people in our cities. And I'm no funding for fascism. I'm no dollars for dictatorship. And for the saucy, I'm no payouts for pedophiles. If you say something that is sort of blandly milquetoast inoffensive, then no one's going to hear it anyway.
And this is happening in real time. This is the Gestapo. I call them the Gestapo. I say Trump is terrorizing American cities, war with American cities, Gestapo being unleashed. I go hard in the paint because first and foremost, that's what they're doing. I think words matter, and I think words that catch matter also. And I think that's an accurate framing with what's happening with what we're seeing with our eyes and our ears, right? But the timidity, this is once they are unleashing, and they, meaning the Trump administration, is unleashing National Guard, military, ICE to terrorize kids, zip-tie kids, tear gas 2-year-olds, tear gas cops. What more do you need to see, folks? This, like, if this doesn't let you, put on the brass knuckles, at least rhetorically, then get out of the way. You're useless to me. You're about as useful as a second rotten belly button, and it's a rotten belly button, which means it has to be excised, right? And there has to be a culling, because what more do you need to see when Donald Trump openly says he's open to using the Insurrection Act? He said that yesterday. Stephen Miller is now all over the TV, talking about invasion, left-wing terrorism. Folks, this is where we need to come on. You need Democrats to fight, fight, fight. There is something about race that I want to talk about here, because I talked about you said the white data dude complex. And I think that's very important. The white part. Not all white people. We like white folks. 45% of white women who didn't vote for Trump. Thank you. I know many of the Grand Tifas are here. You're welcome. Not all white folks. We're talking about white supremacy and how racism infects and influences all of this, the data, the talking points, whom Democrats consider to be a real American, whom Democrats consider to be a suburban American, whom Democrats, value more, whose vote they chase more. It all influences everything. And I wanted your take on this, because I think a lot of this was exposed in the past few weeks with the murder of Charlie Kirk, not done by the left, allegedly by Talia Robinson, a white man from a conservative Christian family. You saw Ezra Klein, a lot of the white moderates, and a lot of the white data dude complex talk about, well, we have to win. And in order to win, it's all about winning. Charlie Kirk did politics the right way. And maybe we can punt on abortion rights. And maybe we can punt on the woke because it's all about winning. And then Ta-Nehisi Coates in that conversation with Ezra Klein was like, maybe you didn't have to say anything. Maybe listen to black people and people of color and why they're not engaging in hagiography over Charlie Kirk. And Ezra Klein just could not listen. I listened to that entire conversation. It was blind spot after blind spot. And it reminded me of so many of these white colleagues, these alleged white moderates, rich white folks, white establishment folks in the DC, New York Beltway who just refuse to listen and are stuck in the abundance, third way, moderate, corporate, consultant, yada, yada, yada talking point space and refuse to get out of it. And even now, after being universally shamed for the past 2 weeks, they still don't get it. Your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, obviously Martin Luther King Jr. said it very, very beautifully. And I don't have it verbatim.
1963.
Sorry.
1963, letter from a Birmingham jail. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not quoting it verbatim because I'm not looking at it. Feel free to quote it verbatim if you know it by heart. But basically, that like his core impediment is really the white moderate who is basically saying like just wait your turn and you're asking for too much too fast and so on. Um, I think that this is why there's a moral argument to make, and it is an argument that I, to be clear, like absolutely fundamentally believe in, that, as I said before, politics isn't a game of getting elected so that you can have a placard that has your name on it. Politics is a purpose in order to get an agenda enacted.
Yep.
And as evil as MAGA is, you got to hand credit where due. They have an agenda and they want it enacted. Like, they're not trying to get elected for shits and giggles. They're trying to get elected in order to destroy and decimate the society as we know it and remake it for and only for a handful of landed white men, as we all know, not news. And so what happens, and I'm in a lot of these conversations, is that people sort of hide behind this strategy conversation. And they will even say, and, say to me directly, yes, 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 and not. We actually agree. Like, we also want to see more justice and more liberty and more this and more that. And what you're doing is actually getting in the way of it, because the only way that we're going to achieve that is by electing more Democrats. And then we will deal with the business of governance when we get there. And the way that we get more Democrats elected is by essentially being sort of the like B minus version of Republicans, kind of crediting their argument. Because what happens,
Immigration is a great example. We'll keep punting on immigration again and again and again. It won't affect us. It doesn't affect the whites. Now the border has crossed Chicago and Portland, and we'll just be Republican-lite on immigration. Did it work? Sorry to interrupt you.
no, not at all. So what happens is, and there's a series of incredibly robust studies out of the EU where they've looked at elections from like 1990 until 2019 across all EU states. And they actually did a systematic review of any and every time a center left party capitulated to the far right, specifically on migration, to see whether that is a viable electoral strategy. And the TLDR, I'm happy to share the studies with you, is no. Like, basically what you're doing is just basically giving votes to the right. Because again, and I said before, like, I also believe in the moral argument, but the moral argument is not what gets heard. The argument is the electoral argument, which is why I wrote the piece that I wrote. Because the claim that I am making is that it's not simply that this milquetoast middle approach is a moral failure, it is also an electoral failure.
There you go.
And the rejoinder back, again, deep wonk, people will say, yes, but for example, let's go in the Wayback Machine and let's look at a person like Bill Clinton, right? Bill Clinton, got elected, as we all know, and then oversaw, as we also know, the largest historical shellacking of the Democratic Party in the midterms. Now, to be sure, anytime, there's an anti-incumbency bias in midterms, like that's a sort of natural thing that we are used to. But that went so far above and beyond what we had seen. We saw a similar pattern with Obama. Clinton, Bill, he promised to end welfare as we know it,
I
right?
remember.
Promised to, you know, make people start working. Basically, he advanced an anti government argument under the hypothesis that, well, these in the middle of the road, swing, moderate, whatever voters, they have an appetite for this. So the way that we win is by saying, well, folks like this, so we need to feed this appetite. Instead of recognizing that in his case, he temporarily won a battle, to be sure, and he unleashed or helped unleash the most horrific kind of war. When you credit the idea that what you want out of your public servant is a person who hates government, at least to some degree, then basically what you're doing is you are crediting a right wing story, which then
Mm,
goes against your party. This goes back to what I was talking about before with this idea that we can fight each of these campaigns as a rhetorical island, and we can try to get over the threshold just here without recognizing that what we're doing is overall damage to the world that people want, their common sense understanding, how they come to judgments. Because in reality, humans are not rational creatures.
nope.
And the way they come to judgments, electoral and otherwise, is on the basis of their impressions, their identity, and most importantly, the repeated refrains of their friends and family. So rather than believe that we can eke out these wins in wherever, hard places, purple places, not purple places, by kind of presenting the opposition's argument and saying, we'll give you that too. We'll just give you that with slightly more of something else. We have to recognize that it is our job as campaigners to actually toggle people into the most progressive understanding, to meet them at the place of their shared values instead of their podcast induced prejudices. And when we do that, we don't just win single elections, which we do. We actually make it easy to win more subsequent elections because we alter the understanding of what it is you should be looking for from your public servant.
That's fantastic, and I appreciate that breakdown. And you're seeing what I think is a civil war within the Democratic Party, and I use the word Democrat largely loosely, because you're seeing a resistance, a hesitation to meet people where they are and to meet them where they want to go, which is against the oligarchy, against the rich, against the 1%, against Netanyahu, against AIPAC, against the genocide. And I've been told vote blue no matter who, except that Mamdani, F him, except that AOC. F her, right? And the failure, folks, you're seeing it in real time. The date today, I want to make sure, yep, October 8th. Zoran Mamdani is surging. He went from a distant number 2 to now Eric Adams has dropped out and he's surging. He's climbing. He's not going down. He's climbing more and more and more and more and more. And to this day, Anat, the Democratic leadership, which is based in New York, coincidentally, Representative Jeffries and Senator Schumer have not embraced Mamdani. Just when it comes to moral failures, strategic failures, electoral failures, you've been in this game a long time. Your response.
I mean, so many responses. Again, going back to this idea that we need a really big tent, which I agree with, in order to defeat authoritarianism, but you're unwilling to even be in the tent with your fellow co-partisan. Going back to the fact that most voters are extraordinarily low information, which, everybody knows and everybody accepts. That's not a disputed idea. And yet you don't understand that people vote on brand, right? And that there is a sort of Democrat brand, and you either get people to hunger for and desire that because for the most part, that's all they're kind of going on, or you try to make believe that what people believe about Democrats is made out of what each individual Democrat says. And then finally, this idea, and this is just really, I mean, so much of it is infuriating, that Mamdani is some sort of, special case because New York is a special case. Hi, by the way, New York is our largest city as far as real America. It's about as real as it gets. More Americans live in that place than in any other place. So I don't know what makes real to you, but I would say that's pretty real. Say the same thing about California as a state. yes, there are particularities to every person running, and districts differ and places differ. But what Mamdani is doing very clearly and beautifully is that he's presenting not a bullshit opportunity economy, vague kind of promise. He is availing himself of repetition. Everybody knows what he's for. I live in California. It's as far away, Hawaii is farther, but like I can't vote in New York. And I can tell you what that dude stands for. It's free transit, rent freeze, and public groceries. So he makes an economic promise that is specific, it's tangible, it's what people want, and he doesn't shy away from what else is going on, the actual conversations that need to be occurring. Another piece of what he does, which has nothing to do with New York City, is that he avails himself of one of the most persuasive tools that anyone has in their belt, which is social proof. Social proof is quite simply just the idea that humans as social creatures do the thing they think people like them do. So when Mamdani makes ads, and this is not all his ads, but many of them, that are shot not with the camera here facing him, but rather as if his eyes were the camera, what he's doing is showing you, the audience, that people are very excited to see him. How many of his ads are people being like, Soren, oh my God, I'm seeing him. I'm so excited. And the message that that sends psychologically, which you could do in suburbia, which you could do in rural, I don't know where, it doesn't need to be in New York City, is, oh, people like this person. They are happy when they see this person, which creates an instinctive emotional response in the viewer. Oh, I guess I like this person. I guess I'm happy to see this person. And that could be replicated anywhere. I mean, there are many layers to what he's doing, but the idea that you don't endorse and go along with and enthusiastically support a person who is within your own party, I mean, it's befuddling. And I want to say one other thing, if I may,
You may.
because despite the fact that I live in the Bay Area and I get told on the daily, oh, you seem really angry. I'm like, bitch, I live in a place of anger. Like, you're not, I don't know what's going on. Maybe much, right? Kombucha. People find me very strange here, very confronting. Maybe I need to move to New York. Uh, the folks who claim, they say that their core purpose is to help Democrats, right? We are here to help Democrats. We want to make sure Democrats get elected. And so, and they tell us that they believe that Democrats' core debility to woke. To be clear, that's not my belief. But folks who like this is what they say they believe to their core. Why? And I really do mean why. If you believed that Democrats' core debility with voters is that they are quote unquote too woke, which by the way, most voters have no fucking clue what that is. Like they really don't know. They haven't heard of it. They are not paying attention. I can't emphasize the degree to which most voters are paying no attention until perhaps October, if even then. And all of these conversations are completely outside their purview. By the way, if you look at actually what's trending in social media more broadly, the shutdown isn't even there. Normies are not paying attention to the shutdown. I know that's hard to believe for all of the junkies, but I'm telling you. So if you're saying to me, my task is to try to help Democrats, and I believe their core debility is that they are too woke. Excuse me, sir, but why is it then that you are publishing op-eds in the New York Times and talking constantly and unrelentingly about how Democrats are too woke, as if your core purpose is to make sure that voters hear that? If that's truly what you think, and by the way, I can tell you, you have Chuck Schumer's personal phone number and Hakeem Jeffries as well, and really the people in power, which is all of the donors, and you could tell them that on the DL. Why are you publicizing the thing that you claim is most repugnant to voters? That's where I just call bullshit on the entire endeavor, because if that's really your analysis, then why are you going out of the way to publicize that analysis?
And the cynical answer, I think the correct answer is because they still suck at the teat of white supremacy and corporate greed. They want restoration, not reformation. These were some of the same Democrats who, over the past 5, 6 years, hated the BLM movement, thought it was too divisive, thought Me Too was too much, want gays to go back in the closet, hate the fact that Muslims are there. There's a component of comfortableness. They don't want to be made uncomfortable. And seeing these browns and these blacks and these women and these workers demand their rights, it makes them a bit upset. The same white moderates that MLK talked about in 1963, the ones with their money and their consulting agencies, are giving Democrats the worst messaging, whereas their base is literally telling them, this is where we stand, join us where you are. And we're told, back blue no matter who, except that guy and that person and that person. And the message seems to be pretty clear. Anyone who's willing to go up against the oligarchy, the broligarchy, the 1%, and stand up for the rest of us and says, hey, let's make America affordable again, the establishment is effed. They seem to be winning, Anat. They seem to be winning. I promised I'd let you leave at 5. Um, I give you the final word.
Look, shit's hard, but I think in the same way that we recognize when many Democrats, again, not all Democrats, do the very silly thing of think that Republicans are going to side with them, think that Republicans are finally going to like have their come to Jesus moment, and you know what I'm talking about. All the times they're like, this time they're going to come around and do the right thing, right? We were treated to this many, many times in the Biden years. And it's still, I mean, it's astonishing. But this idea that like, we're going to sit down and negotiate with them in good faith.
Schumer did it last week. He did last week. I think this time. I think this time Donald Trump hurt us.
This time they're going to do it. So we see that and we recognize it as utter foolishness. What I would say to us, and I promise I'm saying this as an empowering thing, so bear with me, we should reflect on how silly it is for us to do that exact same thing with many, not all, but many mainstream Democrats.
Mm,
The idea that we think that if we argue with them and if we make a case and if we this and if we that and if we that they're going to change is just as silly as when they think that Republicans are going to change. So we need to apply that analysis on ourselves and recognize that there is just that as there is a systematic pattern to all authoritarianism, there is a systematic pattern to effective resistance to authoritarianism, and it doesn't come from the opposition party, even in places where there is an actual opposition party that is willing to act as such. It comes from the unrelenting resistance, refusal, and ridicule of everyday people,
yep,
eroding the pillars of support for the authoritarian regime. We're the ones we've been waiting for. We have to work with the Democrats who are willing to do it. Fine, we can keep pushing the ones who aren't, but ultimately they will go where we lead.
that's right. We have the numbers. We're the majority. We need the overwhelming presence and force people out in the overpass, people out in Portland, joyful warriors, people out there being lawful and peaceful, surrounding ICE agents. That's what worked, folks. If you saw that video clip that trended, there was community members came out, tried to protect their fellow community member, and then finally, after 4 minutes, the two ICE agents just gave up and ran away. Our presence out in the streets, us being out there, being loud, being vocal in our local communities, speaking out. We have the numbers, and we have to use those numbers to push the Democrats because elected officials are tools. I always use them as tools to actually accomplish what we, the people, want. If they're not the right tool, you replace them with another tool. If it's an effective tool, you sharpen it. Anat has to go. That's the phone number. That's the alarm. Anat Shenker-Osario is the author of the Words to Win by Substack, and she also says all of this for free on a podcast called Words to Win By. I'm so happy that 1,300 people turned into this wonky conversation. I'm like, maybe if we get 500, but to get 1,300, that's a testament to Anat and her angry, chill Bay Area mojo wisdom. Thank you. I'm from the Bay, by the way, so I'm born and raised in the Bay. I walk like a Bay Area dude, but I think and talk like a New Yorker. I think Anat might be the same as me. Folks who joined us late, this conversation will be up later on our Substacks. Everything's free here on the Left Hook, no paywalls. If you can become a paid subscriber, join Words to Win By. Pay her, and if you have a few dollars left over, I have 800 kids. Let me feed one of them. But either way, this will be out here. Anat Shenker-Osario gives actually winning progressive messages to Democrats. Will they listen? Inshallah, they will. But if they don't, at least you can. Be kind, be a joyful warrior, rest when you can, and please, oh, please don't be a fascist. Thank you, Anat.
Thank you.